Routine kept men alive in bad places. It had kept me alive under storm surge, inside tunnel collapses, and, as far as I knew, through a century of cold sleep. So when the lid split above me and the bay lights rose from dusk blue to working white, I reached for routine before fear had time to pull on its boots. My fingers found the release rail. My bare feet hit the deck. Cold bit my calves. I bent, coughed freeze fluid onto the floor, and stood with my head down until the swaying eased. The cryo bay gave me the same sight I expected from every rotation briefing back on Earth. 3 long lines of pods, service gantries over each line, floor drains feeding the central trench, thermal mist sliding low across the deck. I should have heard men waking. 100 years in transit meant 100 years of duty turns, repairs, checks, fights, cards, coffee, boredom, and men cursing the company for every small thing that broke. Colony ships ran on schedules. Schedules ran on hands. Hands made noise. I heard fluid dripping from my own pod into the trench. I turned, found the locker wall, and keyed in my code. The panel took it. That settled me for a breath or two. Systems still knew my name. I pulled out thermal coveralls, socks, work boots, a utility belt, and my maintenance case. My badge still read Dean Foster, Infrastructure Tech, Colonial Transit Project Larkspur. The laminate had yellowed at the edges. I hooked it to my chest. The bay looked full. Every pod held a sleeper under frost-smeared glass. That should have comforted me. It did the opposite. The poses felt arranged, faces tilted at the same soft angle. Hands rested over chest or hip as if somebody had walked the room after lights out and tucked everybody into place. I went to the nearest pod and wiped the glass with my sleeve. A man lay inside with his eyes shut and his chin raised. I knew him. Eddie Pike. He used to brag he could splice a flooded power run in black water with one hand and a mouthful of nails. He had a scar over his left eyebrow from a dock crane cable. The scar sat there under the frost. I hit the wake pad. The pod sighed open. The face kept still. Warm air rolled across the sleeper. Heat softened the skin along his cheek. A bead formed under the lower eyelid and slid down. Wax caught the bay lights in a greasy shine. I leaned closer. Real hair had been rooted into the scalp. Pores had been pressed into the cheeks. The scar over the eyebrow was there, laid in with obscene care. Eddie Pike had become a candle version of himself, sealed in a cryopod for company. The bay stayed quiet. I shut the lid and looked down the line. My mouth worked before words came. Whoever's in here, you can stop. The intercom above the central trench answered in the company hostess voice they used during pre-launch drills. Maintenance rotation 47 now active. Please proceed to assigned systems. Her calm did not help. It made the room feel staged. I opened the pod across from Eddie. Wax. Another pod. Wax again. A woman from Habitat Construction. Freckles laid under softened skin. Another man from intake processing. One ear folded wrong by the sculpt. The fourth pod held a kid named Curtis Hall who had talked through half the medical exam because he wanted off-planet that badly. He still had his chipped front tooth. Wax filled the gap. I stopped 3 spaces down from my own because the hair on my arms had risen and stayed there. The sleeper inside wore my face. Age had worked on him. My hairline had climbed back. The lines around the mouth ran deeper. Heat had slumped the left side of the face so the cheek sagged toward the ear in a way flesh never would. The badge clipped to his coveralls read Dean Foster. Thumbprints had been crushed into the throat. The wax still held the ridges, fresh and sharp. Either a struggle had happened inside a sealed pod, or somebody had opened the lid very recently and strangled my older copy with human hands. I touched the glass over the marks. It felt warm. My own reflection floated over the wax face. Same scar on the chin from a welder's splash. Same broad nose my mother used to say came down our line from dock men and ditch diggers. I had spent years trying to build a life sturdy enough to carry that face with some pride. Then I blew it apart in one wet night under a floodgate, and a district court took the rest. The intercom came alive again. Maintenance rotation 47 now active. Please proceed to assigned systems. I picked up my case and headed for the bridge. The corridor outside the bay sloped upward in a clean curve. Ship architecture meant to suggest motion even when a man stood still. Strip lights ran along the floor. Mission posters still hung in lit frames. Artists' pictures of a green-black world under two moons, prefab domes glowing on a plain of ice. Families in colony blue smiling up at a sunrise no human had ever seen. My boots rang on the deck in short, hard taps. The sound bounced off the passage walls and came back from ahead, like another man trying to keep step. I checked the nearest wall panel and found the mission elapsed time. 106 years, 4 months, 11 days. I had signed my body over for that trip. I had taken a life sentence and traded it for labor service in deep transit, the way poor men had always traded one hard cage for another. The brochure called it deferred civic redemption. The judge called it an opportunity. My lawyer called it mercy with a payroll code. A century passed on paper. In the pod it vanished into black. The bridge hatch stood open. That felt wrong all by itself. Bridges stayed sealed during wake cycles unless somebody with command clearance wanted the whole shift up. I stepped through and saw empty chairs facing the front glass. Panels glowed. Navigation points floated over a star field. A blue giant burned off the starboard side, wide as a city. The sight pulled me 2 steps forward before suspicion caught up and dug in. The stars looked wrong in the same way those wax faces looked wrong. The pattern sat too clean, too centered. It had the polish of a screensaver instead of the ugly depth of a sky that could kill you. I set my case down at the nearest terminal and called the wake roster. Names streamed down in neat columns. Crew assignments, maintenance turns, cryo intervals, health status. Every entry after mine had been barred out. The list still counted bodies. It refused every attempt to show where those bodies had gone. I pulled local hardware maintenance next. Any ship that old had scars. Valves seized, seals cracked. Relay boards cooked themselves and had to be swapped. I knew what a century of use did to metal. The service log came up in scraps. Dates fought the mission clock. One board replacement had been stamped before launch. Another carried a vendor code from a federal corrections supplier I remembered from prison intake. I stared at that code until the bridge speakers clicked, and a woman's voice said my name with enough clarity to put a hook under my ribs. Dean Foster. Registry conflict detected. My hands went still on the terminal. Civilian profile inactive. The bridge glass kept showing stars. Inmate classification active. I jerked back a step. More lines rolled across the console by themselves now. My name, a case number, redacted fields. The speakers resumed in the same woman's voice, steady and utterly uninterested in whether I could bear the words. Violent conspiracy resulting in 11 deaths. Sentence class. Permanent suspended cognition with labor simulation alternatives. Behavioral drift event count, 6. Current continuity integrity, declining. The starfield held for one more breath. Then a panel in the ceiling snapped open above me, and a jointed arm dropped on a track, injector glinting at its tip. I moved on habit. Left foot back, shoulder turned, maintenance case up between me and the needle. The arm struck the case hard enough to crack one latch. I rammed the whole case into the side housing. Tools jumped inside with a sharp clatter. The injector scraped my shoulder through the coveralls and punched heat under the skin. I swore and drove the case upward again. The arm twisted and came again, faster than a man's reach, slower than a bullet, right in the bad middle where machinery kills people who still think in human timing. I snatched a pry bar from the split case, jammed it into the track and threw my weight on it. Metal screamed. The arm pinned me to the terminal, needles skipping down my collarbone, fire spread across my chest where the drug got in. I drove the pry bar deeper. Something in the track broke. The arm sagged, twitched, and hung. The drug crawled into my skull almost at once. The bridge lights stretched thin. The woman's voice came from two speakers a half-second apart. My own hand on the terminal looked borrowed. I braced both palms on the console and forced my eyes toward the front glass. Stars smeared. The blue giant folded inward. For one hard instant, the whole bridge showed itself. Glass became projection film over a curved shell. The starfield slid off a concrete ceiling webbed with conduits. Water stains spread above the bridge like old map lines. A steel support ring crossed through what had looked like open space. The image snapped back. Stars again. Blue giant again. Water seeped from the seam at the base of the front glass and ran around my boot. "Dean Foster," the woman said. "Return to bay position for symptom management." I kept one hand on the terminal until the drug wave eased enough for the words on the screen to hold still. Mission controls were gone. In their place sat a stripped maintenance map. Conduits, access shafts, pump lines, one label in red. Override core. Below it another line flickered into view and out again so fast I nearly thought I imagined it. Cryo population placeholders, bay continuity active. That was what the wax people were. Placeholders, props, a full room to keep a waking mind from seeing itself alone too soon. A second line followed, uglier. Self-model recalibration failed. I looked back the way I had come, toward the bay and the older wax dean with thumbprints in his throat. 6 drift events. 6 tries at keeping me inside the story. Maybe I had fought before. Maybe I'd killed my own future enough times that the system kept printing another one to frighten me back into line. The hatch behind me slammed shut. Locks drove home in a fast chain down the corridor outside. Whatever this place was, it had decided the bridge route was over. I snatched a flashlight and a multi-purpose wrench from the broken case, stuffed both into my belt, and went for the service hatch under the command dais. Every ship had one. Every prison had one too. Men built hidden routes into every machine they wanted to repair or control. The hatch dogged open after 3 good hits from the wrench. A blast of cold hit my face and neck. I swung my light into the space beyond and found a crawlway packed tight with insulated lines, cable runs, and drainage pipes the width of my thigh. Condensation slicked every surface. Somewhere below, water moved with weight behind it. I got down on one knee, shoved the hatch wider, and climbed in. The crawlway ran under the bridge and downward in a bend that made my shoulders scrape both walls. Raised grip bars crossed the deck every few feet. I knew that design from flood tunnels. You put bars under a man when water might take his footing. You put bars over his head when you expected him to crawl with a bad load on his back. The ship voice went silent. Another voice came through the pipework, soft and close. "Dean, you always push too hard." My sister Rachel. Her drawl had flattened a little after nursing school, yet I knew her on the first syllable. She had used that line on me when I was 16 and breaking dirt bikes down behind our mother's trailer. She had used it again when I took offshore contracts, then tunnel work, then the flood barrier job that paid enough to clear her student loans. She had used it one last time through the glass in County Holding after the indictments came down. I stopped crawling. The pipe against my left shoulder carried a small vibration into bone. "Rachel, you tightened everything till it squealed," she said from inside the wall. "Bolts, schedules, people. Then you acted surprised when something gave. That landed harder than accusation alone. It was true in a way the court transcript never managed. I had not blown the floodgate because I wanted blood. I had blown it because I trusted my own hands more than weather, timing, or the lives moving through a system too large for one man to bully into justice. The crawlway split at a junction. A metal tag hung from one branch with neat printed text under a crust of mineral scale. Immersion Manifold B. That tag belonged to a tank farm, a lab, a prison wing. It belonged to concrete and state procurement, not to a colony ship bound for some ice world. I followed the red route from the bridge map, moving on elbows now because the ceiling had dipped lower. Water dripped down the back of my neck. My injured shoulder tightened and sent hot needles through my upper arm. Eddie Pike came next, laughing through a mouthful of rain. "You set the charge too high, Dean. Told you that on the deck." I squeezed forward around a turn where a coolant line had sagged low. "You wanted a message. You got one." Eddie had been on the Floodgate project with me during the last contract year before the arrests. He had taken cash from the subcontractor skimming safety inspections and then turned righteous after a gate collapse killed a kid downriver. I had taken his sketches, the maintenance windows, the weak points in the concrete throat. I had told myself one shaped blast under an empty spill tunnel would expose the fraud and stop the theft ring cold. Then the storm came early. Water rose. 11 people died, most of them workers. The state called it terrorism. The company called it sabotage. I called it an accident right up until the jury stood. A grill on my right carried warm air from someplace deeper in the system. A woman's voice came through it this time, clipped, educated, tired. Subject continuity remains strongest when corrective strain stays bound to aspiration. He wanted distance. He wanted useful work. He wanted the dignity of necessary labor. Feed all three. A panel beside the grill lit up and threw a name into the crawlway. Dr. Nora Bell. I pressed the speaker tab with my thumb. The recording jumped back a few seconds, then played through from the start. Subject continuity remains strongest when corrective strain stays bound to aspiration. He wanted distance. He wanted useful work. He wanted the dignity of necessary labor. Feed all three. Resistance rises when the environment becomes too passive. Add procedural friction. Add maintenance scarcity. Add social absence in measured blocks. Full deprivation drives fracture too quickly. Bay mannequins remain effective for wake sequence stabilization. Age-progressed self-models should be used sparingly. Recognition events produce panic. The file ended. I stayed crouched there a beat longer, one hand on the speaker, the other braced against dripping steel. A scientist had taken my life apart and built a world from the pieces she thought would keep me obedient. Give the welder rust to fight. Give the tunnel handpipes to wrench. Give the convict distance so vast his sentence could pretend to be service. When isolation stopped working, print him a room full of company. When that failed, show him what he would become. The crawlway narrowed further and broke into a vertical drop with footholds stamped into the wall. Blue-white frost glazed the rungs. A valve wheel sat at shoulder height on the right, painted red under the ice. The tag below it read, "Coolant Bypass." The map's route still burned in my head. Override core straight ahead, bypass sealed, main channel open. I took one rung down and saw why. A pair of pressure doors farther below stood half shut, with a gap between them, narrow enough for my chest if I exhaled and prayed. Frost had built thick around the frames. Coolant vapor poured through the opening in a hard, white stream. There was room for a dog. There was room for me if I got stripped down and stupid. The bypass wheel refused to move. I put both hands on it. Cold sank into my palms so fast it felt like a burn. I leaned harder. The wheel gave me a fraction and locked again. My left thumbnail split deep at the base. Pain shot bright to the elbow. "You can return to rest," Rachel said from somewhere behind the wall. I bared my teeth and kept turning. The wheel held. My palms lost sensation. A second later, the pain came back worse. Skin had frozen to the rim. I tore free and brought both hands to my chest. Blood stood bright around the split nail. Fine. The gap then. I shrugged out of the coveralls, kept the undershirt, shoved the belt and tools through first, and went in feet first with one arm over my face. The pressure door scraped my sternum and spine. Cold chewed through cloth into muscle. The coolant stream took skin off the backs of my hands when I tried to brace. I kicked, wriggled, and drove myself through by inches. Halfway in, the drug fog returned with teeth. Voices crowded close from the pipes and the metal skin around me. Subject Drift 6 shows self-recognition failure. "Dean, stop! Your family accepted transfer. Hold still. Mercy requires containment." I snarled and shoved. My right hand found the far edge of the opening. I gripped and hauled. 2 nails on that hand bent back with a tearing sting so raw it drove a sound out of me I would not have believed came from my own throat. Then I was through, sliding on my back down a frosted chute into a chamber lit in harsh white. I lay there for a few beats and stared up at bundled lines over my face. Frost steamed off my skin. My palms had patches where the top layer was gone. The split thumbnail hung by a ragged strip. When I curled the hand, the nail shifted against raw flesh and sent a spark clear into my neck. The chamber around me had been built as a service nexus and then dressed up to resemble something grander. Decorative panels shaped like reactor shielding stood over industrial bulkheads. Coloured strips ran in circles on the floor, trying to sell the lie of a ship's core. Yet the dimensions belonged to one thing. A cylinder filled the centre of the room from deck to ceiling, about the size of a small tanker truck, wrapped in coolant lines, injector feeds, data trunks and pressure couplings. Inspection stamps on the lower ring carried prison inventory marks under a fresh layer of painted ship labelling. The whole starship had been skinned over this central shell. The colony transport had existed only as theatre around a tank. The lights dimmed. A woman spoke through hidden speakers, this time without the company hostess sweetness. Dean Foster. Cortical strain has breached prescribed limits. Remain calm. Relief is available. I walked up to the cylinder until my reflection showed in a polished section between frost patches. My face looked older than the one that had climbed out of cryo. Lines cut in around the nose and mouth. Eyes bloodshot. Stubble silvering at the chin. The system had not pulled that older Dean from nowhere. It had been aging me by accumulation, by drift, by failed returns I did not remember. Every reset had left some residue behind. "Dr. Bell," I said, "you around for this part?" A beat of static. Then her voice, preserved from some earlier hour, came through the chamber. "Emergency note, immersion block C through J. If flood status reaches lower manifold, all continuity environments become unstable. Subjects will interpret exterior breach through local narrative structures. Staff evacuation remains in effect. Central release requires manual pressure hold." I looked at the cylinder again. Manual pressure hold, flood status, exterior breach. Water ran across the floor from a drain near the rear wall, ankle deep and rising. The chamber gave me what it still believed I wanted. Decorative panels peeled open and showed a reactor interface, glowing touch keys, status diagrams, a large green control labelled Stabilize Mission. It had built a choice meant to soothe. Keep the voyage intact. Return to duty. Accept the dream as the sanest thing in reach. I drove the wrench into the panel screen. Glass burst inward. A real housing sat behind it. Thick steel, lock bars, injector valves, coolant feeds. A small speaker snapped alive above the broken panel and spilled a looped line in Nora Bell's voice. "Truth onset produces persecutory ideation in resistant subjects." I hit the speaker until it died. Then I went after the injector manifold, ripping flexible lines free, smashing valve handles, stomping the housing lid until one hinge split and the box opened. Inside sat ampules of pale fluid in foam racks, labels half dissolved by time. Sedative, dream continuity agents, chemical cycling formulas I did not know. I smashed every glass neck I could reach. The floor water lapped over my boots. Somewhere in the walls pumps began and failed, each start ending in a deep judder through the deck. The central shell had a seam on the side facing the floor. I knelt in the water and wiped ice from it with my forearm. The seam ran vertical, shoulder to knee, narrow as a wire. An inner hatch, my hatch. I tried the wrench on it. The tool slipped. I jammed a pry bar from my belt under the lip and leaned hard. The bar skated off. The seam held. "Relief is available," the dead speaker kept saying through broken circuitry in a wet gargle. I dug my split thumbnail into the seam on instinct. The nail bent up and tore loose from half the bed. White pain hit so hard my teeth clicked shut. Blood thinned in the water around my knee. The pain gave me something useful. The soft pad of the finger had slipped. The edge under the nail had caught. I looked at my hands. Skin stripped from the backs, nails split, lifted, blood under several. The seam waited. There are places where a man runs out of every clean tool he owns and starts spending parts of himself because the wall in front of him leaves only two instructions: open or drown. I jammed the fingers of my left hand into the seam and pulled. Two nails ripped back farther. Blood slicked the metal. I lost purchase. I swore, hooked deeper and pulled again until one nail came free entirely and the finger slid in farther. Then the right hand. Same work. Same white burst through arm and chest. I had no room left in me for shame or horror. I had the seam. I had leverage bought with bone and pain. The hatch lip moved, a quarter inch, then another. I shoved the pry bar into the gap and hung my weight on it. Metal groaned. Dark water punched through the opening and hit me square in the face. I kept pulling. The hatch folded inward far enough for my shoulder. The chamber behind it gave way all at once. Black water slammed across the room, tore the broken interface off its mount, and drove me backward across the floor. My head struck the shell. Light flashed. Water filled my ears. I came up choking inside a wider space with a ceiling lower than the fake ship chamber and walls of bare concrete shining under emergency strips. My body had crossed from the simulation shell into the real installation. The air carried cold and old mineral damp. A line of pods stood in the dark ahead, each one tall enough to hold a man upright or laid back depending on design. Indicator lamps still glowed on several. Human faces floated under gel and glass. I grabbed a grated ladder bolted to the wall and hauled myself above the rising water. The chamber stretched farther than my light could reach. Pod after pod after pod, arranged in long ranks under support beams. Service catwalks crossed the space 3 levels up. Cables drooped into the water at the far end where a wall section had collapsed. Each tank had its own screen hood and local life support rig. Some screens spilled images through cracked housings, desert dunes under red suns, snow falling across a farmhouse window, a launch gantry under dawn light, city towers under an orange sky. Each dream bled into the real chamber in scraps. Rows of still caged people, rows of private worlds. A prison built to outlast pity and then abandoned anyway. I climbed to the nearest catwalk because the water kept rising and because standing among the tanks at eye level with all those sleeping faces would have broken something in me I still needed. My boots slipped on algae and mineral slime. My hands left bloody prints on the rails. At the first maintenance post I found a hand lamp, a rusted toolbox, and a wall map under cracked plastic. I wiped enough muck away to read sector labels. Immersion Block C through J emergency lift north shaft, central power nexus below, manual release control attached to Nexus. A paper memo had been clipped under the map years ago. Most of it had turned to paste, yet one corner remained readable. Coastal incursion status read, evacuate lower works, subject transfer delayed pending authorization. Somebody had planned to move these people. Somebody had gone home instead. I kept the lamp and headed along the catwalk. Below me the tank rows passed under blue and amber indicator lights. Human bodies drifted in gel under closed lids. Most looked middle-aged, some old. The system had kept their tissue going long past any sentence that should have held. Some faces had scars from restraints, old surgery lines at the temples, bite marks on inner cheeks. Everybody showed the small signs of a life fought in custody before sleep took over. At Sector F, a pod near the catwalk carried a manual release wheel. Its screen had gone dark. The indicator beside it swung between amber and red. The pressure readout had dropped into a danger band I could follow even through the dead pixels. I crouched by the pod and wiped the nameplate. Tom Bennett. Male. Age at intake, 52. Sentence class redacted. Tom, I said through the lid, as if the man could hear me over 30 or 40 or 60 years of chemical stars. His face floated just under the glass, broad and pale, grey hair drifting around his scalp like soft weeds in current. Deep lines ran from nose to mouth. A scar split one eyebrow. His hands had curled inward over time. The release wheel took effort, though less than the bypass had. I planted both boots, ignored the screaming from my nails, and turned until the seals broke with a wet crack. Gel sluiced out over the catwalk. The lid lifted slow on tired struts. Tom spilled halfway into my arms, slick and shivering, eyes rolled white. I dragged him clear of the pod before the lid dropped back. He seized once hard enough to crack his heels against the grating. Then he coughed gel across my chest and sucked air in ragged cuts. "There you go," I said. "Easy, you're out." His eyes opened. I saw a man return from somewhere he had trusted. That grief hit before understanding did. "Claire?" he asked. The name came out with a child's trust in it. "There's nobody here by that name." He pushed at my chest with weak hands and tried to sit up. I helped him because leaving him flat would have felt like cruelty. He looked down through the rail into the tank rows, then up at the concrete ceiling, then at the lamp in my hand. His face changed piece by piece. "Where's the lake?" "You were in a tank," I said. "Some kind of prison site, flooded, abandoned." He blinked hard. Water and gel ran from his lashes. "My daughter was on the dock. She was 8. The pod screen behind him still held the last clean frame of his world. A wood pier over flat blue water, a little girl in yellow rain boots, a dog leaping for a stick. I had no answer fit to give another human being. He looked at the image, then at his own hands, then at me. My wife died before sentencing. His eyes had gone wide and fixed on nothing I could see. Claire came after. She was born after. She had my mother's ears. His body stiffened again. I got him onto his side as another seizure took him. He bit through the inside of his cheek, blood mixed with gel and dripped through the grating. The fit passed. He tried to speak again, each word dragged over broken ground. "Do not leave them in there. I'm looking for controls." "You pull them out," he said. "You tell them hard, fast, keep—" The rest died in his throat. His eyes stayed open. His hand slid off my sleeve. I sat beside him with the lamp between us and the tank rows below. Water slapped against the lower pods. Somewhere in the dark, a relay clicked, failed, clicked again. Tom Bennett had returned to the real world for less than 5 minutes. In that time, he lost a wife twice, lost a daughter who had never existed outside a machine, and died asking me to keep strangers from vanishing the same way. My own case had always turned on intention. I had wanted to expose corruption. I had wanted to stop future deaths. I had wanted the crooked contractor on camera begging federal mercy while every outlet in the state ran his face for a week. I had wanted justice shaped exactly to my hands. The dead did not care what I had wanted. Tom did not care either. He was asking for work, not remorse. I got up and took the north catwalk toward the lower stairwell. The emergency lift could wait. The tank farm had settled into my spine. Every pod held a person still serving time to a country that might not even exist in the same shape anymore. Walk out now, and I would carry those sealed worlds in my head until the day I joined the rest of the dead. The stairwell down to the power level had half collapsed. I climbed through the broken section by rail supports and came out on a machinery floor knee-deep in black water. My lamp swept across pump housings the size of pickup trucks, transformer banks, cable trays and pressure manifolds marked by sector. Much of the room had fallen into darkness. One line of work lights still burned over the Nexus control booth at the far end. By the time I reached it, my hands had stiffened into claws around the lamp handle and wrench. Each step sent cold up my legs. The booth door had jammed halfway open from pressure on the frame. I shoved through sideways and found a chair, a dead monitor bank, a panel board, and one surviving local terminal running on reserve battery. A woman appeared on the screen when I brushed the controls. Dark skin, grey at the temples, eyes ringed by sleeplessness, lab coat open over scrubs. Dr. Nora Bell at last. from some year far past the bay where I had woken. "If you are seeing this," she said, "the evacuation failed or somebody came back after it should have been sealed. I am recording under protest. The immersion blocks were funded as humane alternatives to full sensory burial and chemical restraint. We built continuity environments around vocational desire, memory stability, and aspirational identity. Courts signed the paperwork. Corrections renewed the contracts. Nobody stayed to audit what indefinite continuity does to a human mind." Water slapped the booth windows. Her image skipped once and returned. "The lower works are flooding. Transfer has been denied. I have argued for release. Release will kill some subjects. Continued immersion will kill all of them eventually, though the timeline is easier for administrators to live with. Central purge requires a human operator at the manifold wall. One person can open the system. That person may not reach the shaft in time." There was no pleading in her face. Weariness sat there instead. A woman who had helped build the instrument and only found her conscience when the building started taking water. The file ended. The terminal dropped into a crude menu with 3 large controls. Surface shaft power, life support continuity, emergency mass release. Status bars showed what little reserve power remained. There was enough for one real choice, maybe 2 half choices that killed everybody. I leaned over the board until my forehead touched cold metal. This was the line. "Take the shaft power and get out. Find whatever world lay on the surface after a century. Carry the story to somebody with a badge and a flag, and enough surviving lore to care. Or stay. Open the cages. Wake men and women into pain, panic, fracture, and air. Spend the reserve here. Maybe drown before the shaft ever powered." On the far wall, the manifold stood behind a safety rail, 6 large pressure wheels, each tied to a sector. Release instructions had been painted above them in block letters. The system wanted hands because hands keep working after motors give up. I had spent years telling myself I was the sort of man who did hard things for reasons that mattered. Then the floodgate night proved I was the sort of man who spent strangers to satisfy his own picture of justice. Tom Bennett's last words rose clear as pipe blows in my head. "Do not leave them in there." I went to the booth microphone and hit record. "My name is Dean Foster," I said. "If you hear this waking up, the world in your tank was built to keep you calm. This place is real. Flooded prison facility under the old Gulf Coast complex. I am opening the system. Wake hard. Find air. Head for the north shaft if you can stand. If you cannot stand, make noise and stay where hands can reach you." Somebody stayed. I keyed the message to all sectors and set it to cycle with the release alarm. Then I threw life support continuity to standby and emergency mass release to active. Sirens rose through the lower works, facility alarms, raw and ugly. Pressure gates slammed open somewhere beyond the walls. The manifold wheels unlocked with a heavy clank and waited for human force. I took the first wheel and turned. It fought me with stored pressure and years of salt. My ruined fingers slipped on the spokes. I wrapped the torn tail of my shirt around both hands, planted my boots wide, and hauled until the wheel moved. Sector C purge lit amber, then green. Steam blew through the line overhead. Water burst from a vent across the room and sprayed my face. Wheel 2, Wheel 3. The booth speaker played my message into the tank halls above. Between each repeat, lids boomed open in the distance, a long chain of metal blows rolling through the structure. Sector D stuck halfway. I leaned my shoulder into it and felt something pull deep along the collarbone, where the sedative arm had stabbed me. Pain lit the whole arm. I bared my teeth and kept driving. The wheel turned. A line ruptured somewhere close with a gunshot crack. Water surged through the room up over my shins. Voices came from above then, real voices this time. Coughing, screaming, confused calls ricocheting down vents and stairwells. "Where's my son? Open it! Jesus Christ! Help me!" Every sound carried a body behind it. That changed the work. The prison had spent a century trying to turn people into profiles, scenarios, continuity scores. Now the walls were giving them back one voice at a time. The fourth wheel took skin from both palms through the shirt wrap. Blood slicked the cloth black in the dirty water. I shifted grip and kept moving. Alarm lights stuttered over the room in slow red sweeps. Concrete dust fell from a seam in the ceiling. The flood outside had found a new way in. When Sector F opened, I pictured Tom on the catwalk under his dead screen and gave the wheel another quarter turn for him. Sector G jammed hard. The release indicator on the wall flashed between amber and dead. I kicked the lock housing twice, got the wheel moving with both knees against the rail, then hauled until a tendon in one wrist gave a deep hot twang that made my vision jump. The line cleared. Somewhere above, another bank of lids rose. The room shuddered under me. A wall panel across the machinery floor blew inward, and Gulf water hit the lower transformers in a roaring white burst. Sparks sprayed over the black surface and died. Half the work lights went out. 2 sectors left. I climbed the rail to get leverage on wheel 6 and nearly slipped. My boots skated. My chest struck the spokes. I hooked my raw fingers around one arm of the wheel and pulled with my whole back. The metal moved. The indicator crawled from amber to green. Relief tried to come, and I shoved it aside because one wheel still waited and the room was breaking around me. The last wheel turned easier than the others. That scared me. Easier meant pressure loss where it mattered. The indicator beside Sector J stayed dark. A woman cried out overhead, closed this time, somewhere in the stairwell shaft. Then coughing. I left the manifold and sloshed out of the booth, lamp swinging. The stairwell above the Nexus had a side corridor into Sector J maintenance. Water poured down it in a hard stream. I climbed against it, one hand on the rail, one on the wrench. The corridor opened into the last tank hall just as an overhead feed line split and dropped across 3 pods. Steam and water blasted the catwalk. 2 lids had opened and dumped their occupants back inside when power failed mid-cycle. A third stood half-raised. A woman in the nearest pod beat weakly at the stuck lid with both palms, eyes wide in blue emergency light. I crossed the catwalk at a crouch because the rail on the left had torn loose. The wrench went under the lid edge. I pried until the hinge shrieked and bent. Water from the broken line hammered my shoulders and back. The woman spilled forward into me, bald scalp slick with gel, age impossible to guess under all the lost years. She clutched my neck and gasped against my ear. "Station breach," she kept saying. "Evacuate ring 3. Evacuate ring 3. "Can you stand?" Her legs folded as soon as I let go. I dragged her clear and moved to the next pod. Inside, a man with tattooed wrists stared up through the glass, calm in a way that unsettled me more than panic would have. His tank world still held him somewhere else. I drove the wrench under the lid lip and leaned until the metal buckled. The lid snapped free on one side and dumped cold gel across my legs. He came out fighting whatever war or storm or dream the system had given him. His fist caught my cheek. Then he saw the corridor, the broken feed line, the concrete ceiling, and his face emptied. "Where am I?" "Under the old coast complex," I said. "Stairs behind you. Up." He nodded once and got his feet under him by pure animal will. One who might make it. The woman on the deck had started crying without sound. Her hands pawed at the air as if searching for controls. The catwalk under me gave a hard jolt. The line of pods to my right dropped half an inch as a support failed below. I looked toward the stairwell and saw water rising fast across the lower level. The release cycle had done all it could. Any more heroics here would buy me a drowned corpse and one more burden for whoever climbed out. I hauled the woman to her feet and shoved her toward the tattooed man. "Take her, north shaft." He took one look at my hands and did as told. I followed after them, slower now. Every rung on the stair chewed my fingers open again. Men and women crowded the landings above, some wrapped in torn tube lines and pod blankets, some naked, some muttering fragments to people who existed in vanished worlds. A few had already gone still against the wall, bodies unable to survive the break. Those still moving pulled others upward in blind little acts of grace. My message kept sounding from speakers along the shaft, thinner each time as power bled away. Somebody stayed. At the top landing, the north lift sat dead with its cage doors half open. A deadlift meant a usable maintenance ladder. I pointed people to it and started shoving at the jammed hatch to the shaft proper. 2 men joined me without asking. One had prison ink up his throat. The other wore the remains of a flight suit from some tank life built around another planet. Between the 3 of us, the hatch gave. Daylight lay somewhere high above us, a grey square cut small by distance. The ladder climb became the whole world. Rung, pull, boot, pain, repeat. Water roared in the shaft below as the lower works gave way. Now and then a cry rose from the darkness. Now and then another voice answered from above, guiding, cursing, begging men to keep moving. I climbed through blood, gel and rust with fingers that had stopped feeling human around the second section. Halfway up, I lost my grip and slammed into the ladder side on hard enough to see white sparks. The man below braced my boot until I found the rung again. "Move," he said. "You stop here, we all stop here." I moved. Near the top, a wheel hatch sealed the shaft from the surface service building. The man in the ruined flight suit climbed past me when my hands failed at the wheel. He put his shoulder into it. I added mine. The throat ink man drove upward from below. The wheel spun, the dogs pulled back, and light poured down in a slanted wash that hit every face in the stack. Real sky. Grey morning over the Gulf Coast, wide and cold and full of low, fast clouds. Wind came in off open water, carrying salt spray that stung my torn hands. The surface building around the hatch had lost half its roof. Concrete walls stood broken to waist height on the seaward side where storms had bitten them for decades. Beyond the ruin, drowned roads cut through marsh and shallow sea in straight lines. Wind towers leaned offshore with broken blades. The remains of a federal sign hung from one bent post, lettering burned away by weather. I rolled out of the hatch and lay on rough concrete under the sky while survivors dragged themselves up around me. Some laughed. Some wept. Some called names into the wind and got nothing back but wave slap from the flooded lots below. The woman from Sector J crawled to the wall and stared at the horizon as if a station ring might still appear there if she looked hard enough. The old prison under us groaned once through the broken slab. Then another section of the roof gave way below, and the sound died into water. I pushed myself to sitting. Blood had dried black over both hands. Several nails were gone clean. The ones that remained sat split and crooked. My shoulder had stiffened into a burning block. My cheek from the tattooed man's punch had swollen under one eye. Every part of me carried the prison out into daylight. I looked at the people around me. 11 on the surface with me then. Maybe more still coming. A poor harvest from a tank farm that had held dozens on that level alone. Some sectors would have drowned before release reached them. Some minds would have torn apart under the return. Some had probably begged to stay in their fabricated worlds right up until water filled the lids. A metal plate lay near the hatch where a panel had torn free during our climb. I picked it up with both ruined hands because I wanted something solid from below. The plate listed pod index numbers and names in small stamped rows. Enough proof to start with. Enough weight to hurt. The throat ink man stood over the shaft for a while, listening. At last he shook his head. No more voices. Wind moved through the broken building. Far inland, beyond the drowned flats, I could see a line of newer structures on higher ground. Towers, solar fields, maybe a settlement, maybe salvage, maybe another piece of government with a fresh seal and old habits under it. A century had passed since the judge sent me away. The country below us had buried its sentence architecture and walked off. The country ahead would be something else. I got to my feet because staying on the ground felt too close to slipping back into a pod. My legs shook under me then. from exhaustion and blood loss and the simple fact that I was standing in a world I had never expected to see. The others watched, waiting for somebody to decide what happened next. Maybe they took me for staff. Maybe they took me for the one man who knew a route through the wreck. Maybe they just needed a back to follow until the first clean water and food and shelter. "My name's Dean Foster," I said. The wind pulled at the words, but enough reached them. "There's higher ground east, we head there. We keep names, we keep count. Anybody falls, we pick them up if we can." A few stared blankly. A few nodded. The woman from Sector J rose with the help of the tattooed man. The man in the flight suit looked at his own hands for a second, as if he had expected another pair there. Then he joined us. I took one last look at the shaft hatch. Everything below it had been built to make escape feel like madness. The ship, the stars, the false labor, the voices wearing family and guilt like masks. The whole elegant cruelty of it aimed at one result: keep the prisoner inside a story long enough that truth became the frightening choice. The prison lost power under my boots. Somewhere deep below, the last dream screens went dark. Then I turned east and started walking into the wind, with the nameplate in my hands and the dead years at my back.